We have uprisings across the country, insurrections, protests, many of them peaceful, police rioting everywhere, a military chopper flying low to the ground in Washington, D.C. Very comforting that that person followed that order. A president, a massive cuck who fled to a bunker, then had a temper tantrum, attempted to do national martial law, and achieved it in Washington, D.C. because, in a pretty connected theme, Washington, D.C. does not have statehood. So it can be federally terrorized, including hounding people in their homes and apartments. This might end up really bad. Can't sugarcoat it. Can't have a fantasy about it. It's also, frankly, a relief that at a certain point of pressing people, they go out. So we're going to try to absorb it, analyze it, provide you guys with context, and, do our best here. All of us, have been dealing with this in our own ways. And, I'll say, no glory here. But, when I go out to these things, I don't usually take a phone. So I'm not sort of documenting it, but I can tell you that, and I want to be very clear here. I have no problem. If you want to have a criticism of tactics and you want to debate what is the most effective thing in terms of national messaging, people need to be able to be adults and have those debates. Absolutely. And if you are in media and you are framing this as anything other than enormous police violence and repression, almost like the way a cartel might respond if one of their spots got hit, then you are fundamentally misrepresenting it.
Including the way they're attacking you as journalists. Right?
Attacking you as journalists, popping rubber bullets at MSNBC reporters, using the technocracy to time the tear gassing of peaceful protesters yesterday so he can waddle over to the church. And yes, I'm body shamed and will continue to do so. Look, there's a lot to get to. I want to open it up, though. We'll get to Chuka pretty soon. But what are you guys' feelings, thoughts, impressions? I will say, too, being out, again, I can't give a bedtime story. I don't know where this goes. I think some people are shitting on this from an armchair, which I think is disgusting. I think some people are valorizing and romanticizing some things that, frankly, in their economic positions, they absolutely should not. And I think some people are getting ahead of themselves with where this all goes. But the word, I feel, you don't control the conditions that arise. And being, out there to any degree, including, again, not stealing any valor here, but really to any degree, felt necessary. What are you guys' thoughts, feedback, anything, guys?
I think the outside agitators have really outdone themselves the past few nights. I think it is kind of... There's so many different kind of indicators, right? I marched down Flatbush on Saturday with folks, and the amount of support we're getting from just people in the high rises next to it and the cars in the lane, it's universal. And then on the way back, we saw how quickly that protest, which, somebody in the group was saying that we were sort of with the MLK protesters, and behind us were the Malcolm X protesters that were getting right up in cops' faces, because this is a anti-cop protest, getting right up in their faces, telling them to resign, doing all that stuff. And then you see a lot of people have seen the video of the cop car that tried to learn the wrong lesson from Charlottesville, basically, on Flatbush Ave and rammed those protesters. That they have a there's some kind of there's a knowledge of impunity here with cops behind the wheel, because they were doing that way before. The reason those protesters blocked that car off from going through that intersection was because the cops were swerving in right behind them and basically corralling protesters and trying to split them up, trying to split those two groups of protesters up. They're using like sheepdog, like that's how they're using their vehicles. And the protesters rightly got in their way and said, "You're not going to do that." And it's like the mixed indicators are from like how fragmented our society is. Because on Twitter, right, we all see these images, we all see this stuff. It's not getting through to, I think, people who consume the world mainly through local television news or even cable news, for instance. But I also think there's the media environment is different than, say, 50 years ago, which is that I think, this disaster of a Blackout Tuesday campaign where people put the black squares on Instagram and it blocked everything out. It wasn't good activism, but I also saw a bunch of old people selling to their like relative in, say, Nebraska or something. Like, I don't like this profile picture you're putting up, right? Like, and so I guess like I don't have anywhere to summarize all this stuff, but that's what I've observed.
I think you're right, especially on that last point. I think what's really interesting about this movement, I'm just thinking about other major like Black Lives Matter movements or like mass protests that we saw, sort of sister rallies across the country. I mean, this is an unprecedented spread. Even compared to basically, the solidarity rallies that happened with Ferguson, where like there was some police violence in other cities, but it's really concentrated in one area. I think that it's really fascinating that all across the country, we're seeing this kind of harsh crackdown from the police. And just from personal experience and also from people around me, like the narrative becomes really clear when you're in the streets and you start seeing the police attacking people around you. The narrative becomes really clear when you see that violence. I mean, you can talk about political education and being well read, all that you want, but like literally, like there's the life and death moment where you're like, God, these armed people are like attacking this group of protesters. And that's like, it's a real like political awakening for a lot of people. And just because it's so widespread, like, almost every major city, people in my family back in Texas were, sending me videos of the cops just walking down their street in their like residential neighborhood. Right. And that's a really powerful image to see, like, because it looks like an occupying army. So I feel like, a lot of people really are getting this kind of awareness that they might have not had if they were to be watching it just happening in other cities. When it's happening right in front of you, it starts to become a lot clearer and a lot more visceral. But I don't know. I feel like this is going to be really hard for them to be able to put away. I think that they're going to try their best to come up with these narratives to try to discredit the movement. And you can see, from in certain places, where like just like in the marches that I've been on so far, where they're starting those kind of fragmentation, those ideas of like the outside agitator, like there is a kind of general paranoia, not dominant, but you can just sort of see it coming up, erupting here and there. And like, we need to do our best to make sure that that does not become the dominant story, because that's very clearly is a way to try to make sure, to divide these movements, when what we really need to be doing is continuing to see them grow, which in an encouraging way, they have continued, and they just like really haven't stopped. In Houston today, there was another massive protest that just continued to grow throughout the day. And I don't think that they're going to be able to put this away without literally going to the most repressive apparatus of the state, which could be a very real possibility.
And again, and that's happening.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's, again, why when you pull back tactically and you do look at the same dynamic accelerated, which is a completely dead, of course, the response from Pelosi and Schumer is embarrassing and a failure, just as you'd expect. There's a handful of people on pure civil libertarian grounds in the national leadership, Senator Ron Wyden as an example, who understands and is focused on certain aspects of the overall civil liberties threat, right? Mm-hmm. And then you got a White House and a national Republican leadership that wants to do this. You have seen over the past several years numerous Republican legislative initiatives at state houses to, as an example, let it be legal for people to run their own fucking cars through crowds of protesters. Yeah. That was already in play. That was already happening. The hiring of private mercenary and paramilitary firms. And again, a left that is still very weak relative to these other forces. So, I absolutely they're going to pull out the most repressive metrics, and absolutely they think they can do it. So there's no doubt about it. And to speak to what you're saying, David, I want to play this clip of this cop. I think he's in Greenwich Village.
Yeah.
And just as an example of the conspiracy theories, the outside agitator, and the divisiveness, let's just play this clip real quick.
One moment, sorry.
No.
Here we go.
Us and everything that these cops have given their blood for, and the communities that we serve and they all love, can go back together and get those groups out of here from California, from all over this country, who are being paid to take this movement, which is a good movement, and turn it into violence against the men and women who love the communities. So that's the first.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just absolutely no basis for this. There's none. I mean, this is a conspiracy theory. And again, I have no problem. You want to criticize different tactics, you want to criticize different groups, I'm all for it. I'm not going to forward it right now, frankly. But of course, I think certain tactics are stupid. Of course, I think certain approaches, especially if you come from certain backgrounds, are foolish. But at the same time, and primarily, this is a lie. This is bullshit. And what is he talking about? Like, this leads me to another point. It really drives me crazy to see the deep abuse and propaganda deployment of things that actually have a certain deep value if we get there. Let me explain what I mean. We didn't even pull this. Well, let me start first with cops taking the knee across the country. First of all, come on, people. We all know that that's a coordinated PR tactic. You know that. This is like literally counterinsurgency. And then there was some clips of protesters getting arrested in Minneapolis. And this so happened to be, maybe we'll play it later. Max Blumenthal, I think, was clipping it on Twitter. This so happened to be, relatively speaking, insofar as somebody taking control of your body like that and cuffing you, a pleasant arrest. The cops were speaking with the arrestees were speaking with the cops, with the protesters. There was this local news reporter on the ground who couldn't believe it. This is amazing. Look at them. They're getting arrested and they're talking it out. And he even got some footage of the protesters being arrested saying some things like, we're all human. We all want to get home to our families. We all, X, Y, and Z. That is true. That is true. And the act of evoking such deep values during an arrest like that is the most deep perversion imaginable. It'd be like during the ANC struggle. You're getting arrested by these apartheid security forces. And you're recognizing that you're both part of the same human family. Well, okay, you can recognize that after the system has been dismantled. So if these cops were taking off their badges and were resigning on the spot, cool. That's beautiful. Have that conversation. And some cops are resigning. But the idea that you take, and this is also going to show up in the polls. See, there's one group of people we know, predominantly in the Republican base. They're authoritarians. They want this war at home. They want all the shit the United States empire does overseas. So the connections that we draw, they want that, and they want that accelerated. So they love that garbage that fuck was bloviating about last night. Then there's some people who I think you're right, David. I think they're getting more aware. And this is on top of many things, the police murders, the systemic police violence along racist and class-driven lines, the relationship between the way, frankly, many of us just live in these major cities and the legacy of modern policing. And then on top of it, of course, that we're in a Great Depression and a pandemic, and there's a complete failure of leadership, and we're not doing shit. So there's a lot bubbling. Then there's a contingent of people that, it's like they want that normal. They want that, it's the same conflict in the polling you see. There's increased polling, like 60% of people, the protests are right. 50% of people, they want the military out. Yes, we need police reforms, but we shouldn't cut police budgets. And when you find footage, as they will do, that speaks to those very deep human sentiments, which are correct, but skip the whole process of getting through justice to get there in terms of actual policy changes, not just kind of, again, this is why it's not about personal shit. It's about policy. It's about political change. It's about material change. It's not about personal moralization. Those really deep impulses are going to get abused and perverted. So please, and I'm sure many of you aren't, but please do not do police PR.
Yeah. Jesus.
Please do not do police PR.
You know, and I'm just saying, like, it's striking to me, though. I will say this as somebody who's been around, many Republicans in my life. They talk just like liberals do, privately about love, and like their politics are about love and community and all this kind of garbage, and not garbage, but like, it's just like there's no weight behind it. So like the police are just as capable of coming out and being like, we love everybody, we don't see skin color, whatever. And just, Donald Trump does the same thing sometimes, right?
Donald Trump said he was honoring George Floyd while he was giving his martial law speech.
Exactly.
And we have the police scanners of these NYPD guys talking about shooting and running over people.
Mm-hmm.
Shooting and running over people, which they are all over the country. I mean, we've had police riots for several days now.
Yeah, but again, I'll just say I highly suggest, if you're in an area where you're able to participate in these movements, coming out and joining. I don't know. I've been like major events that I've been in my life, like from Occupy to like I was at J20 in DC, and I don't know what the vibe is like in DC, but this has really had such a powerful energy to it that I think is actually quite unique. And most of these street movements that I've been a part of have been too. But there was a real sense of actual, like, I don't know, approaching some kind of consensus as like a mass versus like a lot of the other movements that I've been to where they've been very fragmented across the board. I still think strategically and like how we're going to organize and do something with this, there's still that question. But I don't know, like the commitment is certainly there. The commitment is really there in a way that I have not seen very often in my life.
Yeah. Let's see. Whew. Yeah, it's just a lot. It's a lot.
Even the mutual aid has been amazing.
Definitely. That's really unique with protests in terms of the bottled water and hand sanitizer and handing out masks and all of that.
And bail funds getting more money than they can.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, go ahead, David.
I was just saying the police have been targeting some of those mutual aid centers in other cities I've seen too, because they know that those are actually very effective. If you know anything about military strategy, for example, like the first thing you do is you shut off the supply chain, and the police understand that that's something that they have to knock out.
Yeah, there's multiple videos of them dumping water out.
Exactly.
There's multiple videos of them dumping water out. Absolutely. And again, I want to just stress, this is about institutions. It is really not about individuals. And that, it's funny because I realize that hits me so hard because it goes both ways. Because I criticize, and I think it's counterproductive and stupid, the whole moralistic culture in general. Mm-hmm. But it also helps moments like this. Of course, we are absolutely inseparable as human beings. I have no doubt. There is one human family. I'm a fucking hippie. And at the same time, unless you have a material action to back that right now, your function is out of place. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, look, I'm glad that the dude in Flint, I'm glad the police chief in Flint, I'm glad his personal attitude is let's co-opt this instead of kick in heads. That's better than kicking in heads. And I think, again, this is what annoys me. Let's be real. Better to see that footage than kicking in heads. But then you see people sharing that, and it's like, what are you doing? Mm-hmm. What are you doing? Yeah. Because and again, I'll be really practical. The police chief said, hey, let's march. Then let's have a town meeting about what this police department can do. We won't accept military hardware anymore. We won't, whatever the case may be. If it's not that, if it's all in this game of symbolism, and that's why, of course, corporations can co-opt this stuff, and corporations can absorb this rhetoric, because if you play at that symbolic level, whether it's posturing in rage and indulging that, or posturing in this false unity, I'm telling you, it's both bullshit.
Yeah. I think the way, like, it's important for people, just with my general advice to that person who might be considering sharing something like that, or like amplifying that message. If you feel solidarity with this movement and these actions, and you're participating in them, you need to think of yourself and everybody in this movement. What we're doing right now is we're making a demand to the state. We're making a demand to, like, the police department, and everything that you do is a part of this very crucial life and death negotiation. And if you've ever been in a negotiation, they always are going to try to lowball you. Literally, the cops coming out saying we love everybody is the lowest offer that they will ever give you, right? Do not accept that crap from them, right? You need to understand that you are a member of a collective group of people, and you can't accept a nonsense solution to a very serious material problem that needs material action, not symbolic action at all. We've had years now of powerful people coming out, as we just said, Donald Trump saying that he is honoring the life of George Floyd. That's nonsense when Donald Trump says that. We should not accept that as anything that we're trying to get from him. What we want is to see the police department get radically demilitarized and defunded. We do not want to live in a society.
Absolutely. There needs to be significant budget cuts. It needs to be demilitarized. And we need to also disaggregate what these jobs even are. And again, I'm not going to jump on slogans that I don't think are effective, because I still see the polls. And I want this shit to actually track. But I have been asking people, and frankly have been for quite some time, and with increasing urgency, why do you think first of all, obviously, no domestic force, if you even take just the Constitution seriously, should be militarized. Secondly, why do you have somebody who theoretically is trained to deal with the most serious shit? There's a shootout. There's a fucking murder. There's something that needs to be solved and figured out. Why are they called in for shoplifting? Why are they called in if somebody is having a nervous breakdown? What are they doing in schools? What the fuck? It's ludicrous. Yeah. It's delusional. And frankly, you can talk to police too. They'll say the same thing. Why am I a truant officer? Why am I a social worker? Why am I all of these things? And then, and we'll get to Chuka in a second, but then of course you see the other reality here, that they have been empowered over, particularly the last 20 years policy-wise, which we'll continue to tease out. We're going to have Cedric Johnson on soon. I'd really strongly recommend that everybody watch this incredible talk on policing reform and against the technical solution, which he gave a couple years ago. And again, he's getting into the material roots of this stuff. Also, Adolph Reed has a fantastic piece on non-site. The point is, of course, the reason you add the class dimension to it is because you also have to recognize that as much as there are individually despicable people, like these fucking murderers of George Floyd, that this way of policing, this way of paramilitarizing, terrorizing communities of color, and policing all poor people is inseparable from how we do our cities today. And how we do our cities today is inseparable from how we've leverage certain market forces. So you have to materialize it to solve it. Period. And again, you have, as part of this context, you could see that these institutions have power beyond the people that are supposed to regulate them. Somebody tweeted, these motherfuckers, look, Bill de Blasio is a joke. These motherfuckers doxed his daughter. Yeah. They doxed his daughter. What situation you have when the democratically elected mayor of a city has a paramilitary force that's driving people through, driving cars into people, beating the shit out of people, escalating all over the place. His daughter gets arrested and they dox her. You don't see the strain, the fact that you're already talking out of the bounds of democracy here, and it's only getting accelerated again with this silly fuck trying to do martial law. But look, let's do a little rap, and then we'll get to Chuka Ejeckum.
You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.